Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode of our Ghost series. In this episode, we look at what's lurking at the waterhole. The Barcoo River is an inland stream in Western Queensland that flows through the black soil channel country to join the Cooper Creek, which in very wet years empties into Lake Eyre in South Australia. Permanent waterholes along the Barcoo ensure adjoining properties have highly productive land for fattening cattle and raising sheep. One such property, Ruthven Station, of about 40,000 acres, is 30 kilometres southwest of Isisford, includes the Wilga Waterhole within its boundaries. The Wilga Waterhole is known for its reliable water supply when other sources almost run dry. It is also renowned for something else. It has a century-old reputation for being terrifyingly, spine-chillingly haunted. Drovers and others who camped there reckon they heard awful shrieks coming from the waterhole at night. Mr. T.A. Gray, known as Scotty, who once worked at Ruthven, explains how he came to reside temporarily at the Wilga Waterhole in 1919. I was about 36 years of age when I went to Ruthven as jackaroo and was given many jobs by Mr. Ramish, the manager, which he would not give to any of the younger fellows. One day he came to me and said, "Are you afraid of ghosts? Do you believe in them?" I replied that I was neither frightened of them nor believed in them. So he told me to pack my kit, take 3 horses and get off to the Wilga shed as boundary rider. At that time, I was unaware of the fact that no one would have the job on or live there, and I was blissfully ignorant of its evil reputation. The Wilga hut stood on the banks of the waterhole. It was a 2-roomed shanty built on split logs with a large fireplace, which Scotty had to rebuild. He lived there alone for more than 6 months, but he was never lonely. The Wilga hole was on the track used by drovers, shearers, stockmans, carriers and swagmen, or tramps, as they rode or walked between reliable water sources heading south to stock markets, homes and jobs. It was customary to have drovers and stockmen refresh their livestock at the Wilga Waterhole and camp overnight on its banks before moving on. Scotty Gray offers his further reflections on his time there. Of course, I had to put up with weird stories told to me by passing travellers, all of which varied considerably. Some swagmen, to whom I offered a bed for the night, reckoned they would not dare sleep along the side of that creek after sundown, which was far from being encouraging to me. But I hung on, although some of the stories would make your blood curdle. After spending 10 years in Australia, Scotty Gray returned to live in his native Scotland in 1929. His recollections of his time working at the Wilga Waterhole on Ruthven was prompted by an article he read called Ghosts I've Seen, which had been published in the Longreach Leader in December of 1940 and sent to him by a friend. At the time of writing his recollections, he was 59 years old. Whilst there were, and remain today, many variations of the Wilga ghost story, it has one remarkably consistent attribute. The tormented presence is heard but not seen. In 1928, Red Ned wrote of the Wilga ghost's history in the Narromine News. 80 years back, the indigenous Aboriginals would not come within yards of it and reckoned that a big devil, lived there. People who once heard the awful shrieks never camped there a second time, as the weird noise was too much for their nerves. Red Ned's reference to 80 years back suggests that Wilga Ghost was around 1848. He also made another observation. The first people had heard the noises long before white man came on the scene. Red Ned also mentioned Millbung Tommy, who was an Aboriginal man buried on the banks of the Wilga Waterhole, and his grave he had personally seen. Australian author E.J. Banfield, writing in 1941 as Beachcomber, suggests that even trying to trace the earliest account of the Wilga phenomena was impossible because it occurred so long ago. The first white men who heard them cannot even be remembered. In 1941, Beachcomber provided a then 50-year-old account of two shearers making their way to the Wellshot Sheds north of Longreach, who camped overnight by the Wilga Waterhole. Their horses hobbled and grazing at leisure. The two men made tea over their campfire, ate their damper and salt beef. They smoked and talked while the hours crept on. The fire bedded down to coals and lost much of its cheery glow. Silence fell upon the two men, and, wakeful, they continued to sit. About them the bush was stilled, the gentle breeze died, and the branches of the coolabahs about the waterhole ceased to rustle. Silence everywhere, and then soft, distant wailing. It grew nearer, louder. Straining ears of the astonished men could not detect how many cries in different keys there seemed to be. Fiends from hell might have made such cries and shrieks, but humans never. Rolling ever nearer, at last the shrieks and screams seemed to be coming from out of the waterhole beside where they were camped, and then to arise from the very ground beneath their feet. When it seemed that the two thoroughly frightened shearers, who stood rooted in their tracks, could no longer listen without losing their reason, the shrieking fell in volume, until again it was merely a weird wailing. As it diminished, the noise left the spot on which they had camped and retreated in the direction of the waterhole itself. It ceased completely, utterly, and about them once more was the silence of the bush. Not a ripple marked the surface of the lagoon whence the noise retreated. Scotty Gray, who lived in the Wilga hut, also repeated a first-hand account told to him by a carrier hauling a load of wool bales with a team of horses. Carriers who have been compelled to halt in the Wilga paddock overnight sleep, for safety, on top of wool bales, and I have heard from the carrier's own lips that on one occasion he was awakened in the middle of the night by a terrific noise, as of thunder and the wailing of something passing backward and forward overhead. He and his mates could see nothing, yet the noise and wailing continued. Becoming frightened, they got down, left everything, even their rifles, and bolted for the shed. In the morning they went to yoke up, but found that their 30-odd horses were gone, and these were found later in another paddock 4 miles away. Another first-hand account comes from Bella, a correspondent to the Narromine News in October 1934. Now, I do not believe in ghosts, but I have heard the screams which have been so much discussed wherever Western Queensland men congregate, and I know for a fact that stock will not camp on the banks of the Wilga Waterhole. Many accounts tell how some livestock become unsettled at night if held near the Wilga Waterhole, not just on evenings when the noises were present. Scotty Gray writes, "While sheep quietly graze, cattle and horses always break a fence and get out." Bella also recalled another occasion when he tried to call a mob of old milking cows close to the waterhole. He thought nothing would frighten them. "Everything went well," he wrote, until about 9 p.m, when they started to rush and ring. In the morning, we were a good 3 miles from camp, and when the horse trailers returned, they informed me the horses had also made a break during the night and were found, badly wrung with hobbles, standing shivering in a corner about 5 miles from the camp. Red Ned also related that camping herds of cattle at Wilga Waterhole, even when rounded up somewhere out on the downs, would keep the tailors going all night as they refused to lie down. If ghosts are departed spirits, reluctant to leave the site of their earthly demise, does the Wilga Waterhole have any tragic incidents that keep those tortured souls shrieking? Of course, Bella believes he knows who the ghost is. First, though, he established his credentials. I was born in Barcaldine, and my father had been in the sheep breeding business in the central west of Queensland for the past 40 years. I've been in touch with the old hands of my life, so I'm in a position to give you all the facts believed to be true concerning the Wilga Waterhole. About 70 years back, a man named Wilfred was shepherding sheep for the late Jimmy Tyson and living in a hut on the south side of the Wilga Waterhole. While Wilfred was living there, a mob of wandering Indigenous Aboriginals camped alongside the yards where the sheep were kept, and during the night they began annoying and pestering the animals. Wilfred went across and tried to make them shift camp. A row started. One word brought on another, and Wilfred was murdered. Then his body was thrown into the Wilga Waterhole, where it was found 3 days later by some drovers. They took the body from the water and buried it in a spot between the hut and the waterhole. When these drovers reached Mount Marlow, they reported the murder. Before the murder of the shepherd, the Wilga Lagoons were one of the main meeting places in those parts for the first people, as fish and wildfowl were plentiful. But there are other possibilities. A correspondent with Brisbane's Sunday Mail, Mr. T. Gill, wrote that he had spoken to a jackaroo who claimed to have heard the Wilga screams. No one could explain the screams, he added, but one story frequently told was that of a young boy employed by a teamster many years ago who was sent to bring in the horses. He did not return, and although searched for, was never found. Some considerable time after, his body, mangled by wild pigs, was found at the waterhole. It is said that the screams now heard are his screams for help. T.A. Gray, Scotty, who once resided in the Wilga hut and heard stories that would make your blood curdle, recalled hearing of another death which took place in the hut he occupied. It is said a boundary rider went mad after killing his wife and daughter. He hid them down a well, and that it is his mad cries that are heard from the waterhole. Next, a suicide, one of the most popular stories according to Strutt, who commented on the Wilga ghost in Sydney's World News, is that of a swagman who went insane after drinking some of the local jungle juice or homemade brew. He cut his throat beneath a tree on the bank of the Wilga Hole. 2 further deaths are nominated on an internet website. A few early settlers speculated that it was the ghost of explorer Ludwig Leichhardt, who passed away on his final fatal expedition. A later theory suggests the ghost of a youth named Toby Coleman, who became lost in the bush many kilometres from the waterhole. All that was ever found of him was one leg. The theory contends that his ghost haunts the waterhole looking for the missing limb. Finally, in our gruesome death count, there's Milbung Tommy, an Aboriginal man who was buried in a grave near the Wilga Waterhole, according to a couple of fellows who worked at Ruthven and seen by Red Ned. That's a total of 7 reported deaths spread over 170 years. Not a single one of them witnessed by any of the actual published correspondents, but all now part of the Wilga Waterhole folklore. Some may be duplicated from other stories, or simply grafted onto the core account in the retelling of the Wilga story, which has since grown, flourished and fruited. But there is no doubt about the existence of the whaling phenomena. Beachcomber in 1941 also wrote that many years ago the story arose that they were made by a bunyip, which is a mythical creature from Australian Aboriginal mythology, said to lurk in swamps, billabongs, creeks, riverbeds and waterholes. Beachcomber immediately dismissed that theory. No such comfortable explanation of the happenings in the Wilga Waterhole is acceptable. Noises made by any creature likely to have been seen by persons in the past days of Australia do not, as far as records go, remotely resemble the yelling and screaming that arises to curdle the blood of the unwary who have camped beside this waterhole on the Barcoo. Another reason to exclude the Bunyip theory is that none of the many who have heard the yelling and screaming phenomena claim to have seen either person or creature in or about the waterhole. Beachcomber also stated, "Not even a flock of demented kookaburras, laughing jackasses which terrified the first Europeans, could make such noises, or any other Queensland birds," slamming the door shut on two potential explanations. Similarly, he rejects the subterranean channel theory, wherein the Wilga Waterhole is connected underground in some fashion to another, and the water rushing through this channel under certain conditions accounts for the shrieking and yelling noises which have frightened so many. This theory has failed to establish any grounds for acceptance, Beachcomber wrote. Another Australian bird has been named as the source for the screaming phenomena, the powerful owl. Our most raucous-voiced bush bird, the largest of all Australian owls. The mysterious blood-curdling screams were discovered to be the work of a powerful owl. Its screams in the stillness of the bush at night have to be experienced to be appreciated, wrote Andrew Nicholson from Weird Australia. However, the habitat of the powerful owl, according to ornithologists, is in the forest east of the Great Dividing Range to the coast from Queensland to South Australia, not on the inland central western plains of Queensland. Another explanation? Destroyed. So the Wilga Waterhole's hauntings remain unique, heard but not seen over a period of many years, and with no viable earthly explanation. Beachcomber wrote again, "Old bushmen who knew the waterhole were content to avoid it. If you ignore his counsel, remember, their ghosts may be heard as you pass." Well, what an interesting tale. Now, there wasn't actually a ghost seen in this one, so was it really a ghost story? I'll leave you to ponder that thought. If a tree falls in the bush and no one's there to hear it, does it really fall? Well, yeah, it does. It's just not heard. So you could say that a ghost not seen is still a ghost. On that note, definitely like, subscribe and share. And hit that notification bell so you're aware when we're posting more crazy ghost stories.
Hi, I'm Max Taylor from RV Touring. Now, conventional wisdom says that if you want to do some forward driving, some river crossings, well, you need a four-wheel drive. Now, stick around because you're going to see something that, look, what do you say, other than some people have more money than sense. Maybe it's persistence, maybe it's stupidity, really not quite sure what possessed these guys to do what you're about to see. So, let's get into it. We came across these guys who had gotten their sedan into a four-wheel drive only area. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, they decided to have a crack at a pretty deep water crossing, and they even did it in reverse. He's going for it! He's going for it! Yeah. Well, how about that, guys? He's actually made it across with his little Toyota station wagon. Mate, I don't know whether to shake his hand and congratulate him or smack him across the head, but I do know one thing. If I was an insurance company, I would not insure this guy.